So when I went back and listened to it, the video did sound a lot like just kind of complaining. So there's a lot of factors. There's the fact that the average gamer, I think, is older. There's some obvious things. The average gamer is older. And, you know, I would say that once I hit 30, my tolerance for a variety of video games just kind of plummeted. You know, I wasn't really able to justify spending a lot of time gaming on, like, you know, I just kind of stopped with MMOs. Like, I played a lot of MMOs in my 20s. And, well, in college, I played a lot of multiplayer shooters, like Halo. But, you know, that's a completely different experience altogether when you're in college and you have kind of a captive audience of friends who can all game with you, right? That's a lot harder to accomplish as an adult, especially as an adult with kids, married, house, all that stuff. You know, when you're kind of approaching middle age as I am, right? So, especially when you're a game developer, it is even harder to justify gaming in a way that pulls you away from, because you do still want to play games as the game developer. You don't want to just completely fall behind on what the latest game design inspirations could be. Certainly, there are a lot of games that, especially in the indie space, that offer inspiration. So, as a game developer, it's kind of weird. You want to focus on games that improve your skills and your knowledge base. So that kind of pulls you away from maybe games that you just kind of like to play. Like, I really just kind of like to, if I just want to, like, de-stress, or kind of be away from the noise and hustle and bustle of, you know, watching my kid or my niece and nephew or whatever, I will play, like, Europa Universalis 4. You know, and that's just like mindless map painting campaign strategy game, right? I've learned all I could possibly learn from EU4, and that's really not that much. It's a very addictive game, but it's like there's not much you can really take from it in the RPG space, right? So sometimes I have to tell myself, like, no, I'm not going to play EU4. You know, I'm going to play Chained Echoes because it's a very well reviewed, popular new indie game, right? Or I'm gonna play Dark Deity, you know, or I'm gonna play some of these mods of Fire Emblem that are coming out, and certainly we'll be playing Fire Emblem Engage when that comes out. So, you know, all these factors come together in my personal experience that decreases the tolerance I have for playing games in general. It just becomes when I have time, when I have energy and willingness, and if I don't feel kind of the guilt of, like, why am I playing this game that just, you know, doesn't really support my development efforts in any way. So that's just my personal experience. You will have your own anecdotal experience. And you know, maybe you're younger than me, you're most likely younger than me, or you're older than me, or whatever, or you're in a just different stage in life. And yeah, some of the things that apply to me don't apply to you, but you've got other things that apply. You know, maybe it's a work situation, a social situation, a health situation, financial situation. I think that all of these things kind of happen in your 30s, 40s, late 20s. They just kind of happen because people generally in America anyway, you don't really feel the burden of adulthood or the fruits of your labor or the, you know, you don't really reap what you sow until, like, late 20s, 30s, 40s certainly. You kind of get to live in a wonderland before that, right? And that includes having all the time in the world and all the attention span and energy and kind of open-mindedness to just play all kinds of games, right? And just waste a lot of time, like, on MMOs and stuff like that. So, but it has been actually interesting. You know, I've learned, you know, so the Dark Age of Gaming video goes a lot into how they talk about microtransactions a lot, and mostly kind of like the corporate monetization, gacha game style, loot box, gambling, all that stuff. And I've actually, is somebody setting off fireworks in my building here? I've actually been able to glean a good amount of game design inspiration from these kind of addiction cycles, like these, not addiction, but like kind of the gameplay loop. I had a little section in our design document called "Taking the Good from Gacha." Right, the bad from Gacha is the loot boxes and the aggressive, sleazy monetization and all. Just basically shaking people down because of their addiction and stuff. Obviously, we're not doing that, but we want to look at. They've got a lot of skill and finances invested in figuring out how to kind of hook people, right? And let me change music here. And so those things can actually be helpful. If you're looking at how to design a regular indie game or a regular indie RPG or TRPG like we have, what are the specific or even high-level categorical things that you can put into a gameplay loop? For example, our game is not a gacha game, but it does involve frequent small rewards as a result of the core gameplay loop. So if you capture a town, you get a resource which you can invest in a variety of different ways, which increases your ability to get more resources. Blah 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 blah. It's a feedback loop. It's a positive feedback loop, and you can actually really tell when the gameplay loop and kind of the engagement loop of Symphony of War slows down. And that's when your guys are starting to get maxed out. You're all at tier 3. You're kind of building up resources because you don't have anything to spend them on. Your armies are full. All of your squads are like 9 units in them. That's when I think the fun slows down, because the fun part, the addiction part, is the growing of the army. The combat is certainly fun. It's thrilling to watch, I think, and playing through the story. But the number one most, I think, engaging mechanic in Symphony of War is growing the army and customizing it. That's by and large like the mechanic that the game kind of leans on, right? And so. These are the things that I've been able to glean from playing gacha games. So we can't just completely, just dump all over. We can't. We certainly can. We can say the sleazy monetization practices. Certainly, I don't think it's ethical, and I don't think actually it should be even legal in some ways to have real money transactions that cannot get you what you want, right? If you're going to put something as aggressive as like an $80 pack to put in a gacha game, that should get you the thing that you're pursuing. You're basically buying an entirely new AAA game, and so you shouldn't have to gamble with that much money toward one game, right? So it's certainly evil, but again, you can't just completely dismiss the significant expertise that goes in designing those games. So I guess from a gamer's point of view, that still kind of is dark agey, because you know if you're not trying to glean how to design a game, that doesn't really help you. But as a game developer, I think it does. So now in terms of other things, I do think that the guy kind of bitched and moaned a little bit too much. Maybe the content creator is a little bit younger. I don't know, but I'm a person who is always trying to take into account multiple perspectives, all points of view. Certainly have my own biases, but I don't think we're actually in a dark age of gaming. I think what we're in is, it's just different. It's there's certainly a lot more choice, and I think there's considering how many games come out on Steam every single day and how about 95% of them get zero attention, there is certainly no shortage of choices out there so it's really kind of a buyer's market in gaming right now. That might be why you could consider game developers or game companies the predators, and so they get more aggressive. The wolves get a little hungrier, so they get a little meaner. So they put gacha and mechanics and microtransactions in their game. That could be, one of the motivations. And certainly, there's so much choice out there. Sometimes I wonder, me personally, born in the 80s, most of my gaming, like as a kid, was in the 90s, right? Because, I was too young to really enjoy games in the 80s. But, the 90s was like my big introduction and kind of like my childhood golden age into. So we look at the games in the 90s, and that's, some of these on the screen here, but, a lot of Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis games, right? And that defined, and I'm a millennial, kind of on the older side of millennials. And so millennials is actually a really large cohort in the American demographic. And so, I grew up without the internet and gaming and without mobile devices and gaming, right? And there's a whole cohort of millions of people who are my age who are in the exact same demographic, right? And so sometimes that makes, going back to the aging thing, right? In the dark age of gaming, I think that he didn't take into account was the fact that we are aging. When we're all in our 40s, are we going to still be scouring the internet for indie games? I certainly hope so, because I feel like the primary audience for Symphony of War is not necessarily millennials, but certainly the cohort that I belong to, right? People who really enjoyed Super Nintendo, PlayStation 1 and 2, RPGs, certainly the crowd that enjoyed Final Fantasy Tactics, Ogre Battle, Tactics Ogre, early Fire Emblem games. We are kind of just slowly going through life, mostly unaware of each other, but we still have that same gaming instinct, which is, if it's me and Mithran's job to serve this cohort as we go through our 30s and 40s, then fine. That's totally fine. We make games that we want to play, even if nobody played them. We want to play them, right? So, because it's just fun. It's just our passion. I love to write. I love to write music. I love to make level design and, game concepts and all that stuff. So, anyway. Yeah, long story short, certainly you could see from a certain perspective that there is a dark age, per se, but I don't think I would call it a dark age. I would call it like we're in a weird, maybe a stagnation in some ways, but it's not really, because there's so many people making games. It's unreal, right? And we can't even call it like an indie renaissance. I think we already had the indie renaissance. That's maybe like a couple of years ago. And now we're like in the indie game. Like now indie games are like, well, they better be freaking good. They can't just be a bid for your nostalgia anymore. They really do have to be maybe a little bit of that, but they also have to be innovative. They have to be designed for the modern gamer. Doesn't have a lot of time, doesn't have a lot of patience for bugs and bad interfaces and inconvenient slow features, right? So that's my conclusion. No one's really talking today, so I guess I don't have really much to go off of here, but that's my individual musing on what the state of gaming is. I don't think it's worth getting kind of too down in the dumps about, kind of like in that video. I think it's good to be aware as players and game developers of, certainly the environment. But I would be thanks for the follows, Sleepy XYZ, Sleepy XZ. I certainly would not be doing my job as a game developer if I were to let this like get to me. If I were to say like, oh yeah, it's a dark age and blah blah blah, like, no, you really always have to be kind of optimistic, and you have to say like, you kind of have to give this stuff the middle finger to succeed in business, of any kind of business, right? Like anyone or anything that tries to tell you that you can't, or there's limitations, or like, yes, but I don't think so, like maybe later. No, you can't function like that. This is a good like motivational speech for like any kind of business, right? Or actually, if you're working for a company, you can be an intrapreneur too. Of course, you have to be smart about it, smartly optimistic, but you should be optimistic. You should be open-minded to, even if like there's a big article on Kotaku or PC Gamer that says the age of indie games are over, right? Or like Steam is like, we are cracking down on any publisher that isn't like 2K Games or EA, right? You still, as an indie developer, have to say like, no, fuck that. We're going to figure it out. We're going to find a way. We're always going to find a way. So that's that. Somebody say, there's people here, but are you just like in awe of my rambling, my incoherent, directionless rambling? Anyway, well, if no one has any input on Dark Age of Gaming, we will move on to, I kind of want to go into Mecha Symphony of War. Thanks. Lurkermeyer says, I didn't watch that Dark Age Gaming video, just in awe of your rambling. Thank you. Anyway, so we have the DLC, which, maybe a few months from now. How do you feel about the current state of gaming affected Symphony of War's release or popularity? I actually think it really benefited it, and I'm gonna kind of toot my own horn on this one. It was back in 2016. Mithrin and I had just finished Echoes of Etheria, and we were just, we were kind of dithering on what to do next. And, those times in your life when, you're looking back and you think, oh, man, I knew what the answer was. I had it in my gut, but I didn't listen to my gut. And years later, now it's just regret because you can't go back. Well, this is one of those times when I did listen to my gut. Absolutely. Because it could be just because we had already, I had made, 2 on my own, and then Mithrin and I made 2 after that together. So under the Dancing Dragon Games label, we already have 4 RPGs on Steam. And maybe it's because of that experience that I was telling myself, look, Echoes of Etheria is like, maybe we didn't quite execute on some things perfectly, but conceptually speaking, I think we really did a great job in terms of, having the grid. Not a lot of JRPGs did what we did, right? It just didn't really gain much traction. For example, Skyborn, the game that made before that, had a lot more attention on it because it got released way earlier and it had kind of a unique setting. But game design-wise, just the fact that we had that grid-based formation and all that stuff was pretty innovative. And so even with that, I feel like we really pushed the envelope on what we could do with JRPGs at the time. So I was saying, look, I was thinking to myself, we probably can't go any further with this. With the tools we have available, with the time we have available, with the resources. So Ogre Battle screamed out to me at the time. And that's when we got to discussing, okay, maybe we can do this in the RPG Maker system, right? And we did it. And it took a long freaking time. But But see, that was 2016, maybe even 2015. We were talking about that stuff, right? And the market was very different. I don't even think we had. Well, maybe we were starting. The gaming was starting the indie game renaissance at that time, but it was pretty easy to see the writing on the wall that by the time another game was going to be complete, indie games were going to have almost the same standards as AAA games. Clearly not in terms of graphics and budget and maybe length and all that stuff, but certainly in terms of just being a good game that's fun to play and having innovative mechanics. I think by the time, I was thinking back then, by the time 2020 comes around, no one's going to have a lick of patience for, oh, it's an indie game, oh, it's nostalgia. Nobody cares. And I think that was correct. I think that was a absolutely correct assumption to plan for the future based on that assumption. So, and then finally, by the time Symphony of War came out, I think another thing that benefited it is the fact that Fire Emblem, back in the day, was still kind of benefiting from really good mainline releases that were still just mostly on consoles. Well, I guess kind of Fire Emblem mostly just does console. And the fact that tactics games hadn't really seen a new mainline entry in years, right? Fire Emblem went from really, really strong entries on the GameCube, and then on the the Switch, ultimately, that I think started to pull away from, like I said, my cohort, people that were born in the 80s and did all their gaming in the 90s, right? Kind of pulled away from it maybe a little bit, especially as they started to get into Fire Emblem Heroes Gacha game, right? So I think maybe it was the failing on the AAA industry that did help. And certainly a lot of our reviews and feedback have been like, oh man, I haven't seen a game like this in decades. Thank you so much. And, there have been a lot of times in my life, like when I didn't buy Amazon stock at first, or I, didn't have a second child right away, right? Where I looked back and I was like, oh man, I knew in my gut, and I didn't do it. I didn't take that action, right? And that is a horrible feeling. Regret sucks because you can't do anything about it. All you can do is learn from it and try not to make the same mistake. But this one time, I listened to my gut, and it worked out. It worked out really well. So anyway, that was a long answer to your question, Lurkermeyer. Thanks for the question. Shall we move on? Let's talk about Mecha SoW. And I think we'll stop at 4:00. But so I don't want to give too much away, on this, because again, we're about to get into the final parts of localization. Then we're gonna do the DLC, which I hope maybe gets out in 3 months, maybe 4 months. And then we're gonna be working on getting the game ported to Switch. So hopefully all that stuff gets done in 2023. And then hopefully we are well on our way before the end of 2023, like full stop Symphony of War 2, right? So that's why I think we are going to do crowdfunding for it on January 2024. Because we're too far away from launch right now. And what's really annoying, and I talk about the crowdfunding a little bit. What's really annoying about Steam, and as great as they have been, our publisher, they have been fantastic publisher, you still have to give them a cut, which is like, yeah, they probably earned it, but like the thing about that is that income from the game doesn't go into the game, right? It can only go into the next one. And it's really annoying to me because we're in the business of making great games. I want to make a great game, right? And when you do a crowdfund, you only have to split that with a little bit of the crowdfund website and taxes, and then the vast majority of it goes into the game, right? And you can see kind of my passion with this, because it's like, it's almost infuriating that the money has to go, it doesn't go into the game, right? So that's what our goal is. And when you crowdfund like that, you're inevitably giving away free Steam keys to all of the people, not all the people, but like the people that bought the tier, like the $25, $30 tier, whatever. Don't hold me to those prices, but those tiers that, say, okay, you're going to get a copy of the game when it comes out, obviously. But then you're also going to get like a whatever, some kind of bling. So they don't then purchase the game after it's launched, right? So that income just gets shifted from later to earlier. But it goes into the game, right? Before it launches. So you can do things like you can plan for things. After a game is launched, it is really, really hard to add fundamental features like full voice acting cutscenes, stuff like that. Or more complicated animations and stuff like that. That stuff is like really baked into the bread or the dough, I should say, of the game. Like after it's cooked, then it's like, then you're just adding frosting to it. So crowdfunding allows you to put all of that money into that dough. So you can do voice acting. You can do, a lot more animations. You can do a lot more classes and stuff like that. You don't have to because it was all out of pocket. Everything was out of pocket for Symphony of War 1, right? So that's why we're going to crowdfund. And then plus, that allows people to kind of be more involved in the process. So we have the ability to say, okay, you can become a unique mercenary, right? And in Symphony of War 2, I think what we want to do is to have way, way more named mercenaries, right? Named unique mercenaries. And they could be named after the people that crowdfunded. Of course, we can't have Chick Magnet 69 as a name of a unique mercenary, so we would have to kind of put some restrictions on how they're designed. But we would, I think for mass designing of crowdfund mercenaries, what we do is just have like a template of okay, we make maybe 100 unique mercenaries across the spectrum of power and rarity, right? They wouldn't just be unique legendaries. They would be like tons of them. So then you would have more often than not, you would have those unique mercenaries than randomly generated ones. The randomly generated would be mostly the conscripts. I would like to do that anyway. So, instead of Beavis and Butthead 69, you would have, an actual lore friendly name, but then you could change that to something that fits, the name of the person, whatever you want, right? So you buy that tier and you get to kind of influence the design of a unique merc, right? Anyway, I'm talking about Symphony of War 2. So, anyway, yeah. And then after Symphony of War 2 is done, expansions, all that stuff are stable. Now what are we at? Has the world ended yet? We're in 2026 by this point, when Symphony of War 2 is out and stable and all that stuff, right? My biggest dream with this whole thing, and Mithrin, if you're in here, what's your biggest dream? Just type it out, because it might not be the same. It might not be the same, because this is all kind of in my head right now. But is a futuristic, and I guess we can call it Mecha, because that's the category, right? And this is another one of these things where, again, if you're trying to make it in business or in employment, this is another thing where people tell you, and people tell me, people tell game developers that the most popular setting is fantasy, is medieval fantasy, hands down, and that is technically true, right? If you look at I do a lot of research on RPG. How many party members you want and what setting you want, and how long of a game, and linear versus open world, all that stuff. I've done a lot of research, and so has our publisher. They have, we all have a lot of information on the results of polls and stuff like that. And fantasy, medieval fantasy, or high fantasy, low fantasy, whatever, is by far the most popular setting, not only in terms of games that are currently out, but in terms of what people actually vote on, right? So what that tells me is don't make mecha games, don't make futuristic games, right? Because, we have, you can see on Steam, we have 5,200 reviews of Symphony of War 2. So let's say we make the same exact game of same quality, same marketing, all that stuff, but it's a mecha game. Oh, now we're down to 1,000 reviews. You could say that based on data, if you go completely based on data, but me as an entrepreneur and as a dreamer, I am not going to let that affect, and you can't either. You can't let that stuff affect you, right? Because why? I mean, in this space anyway, you can't let it affect you because you have to design things based on inspiration as an indie game developer. You cannot, because you don't have the resources to do this, you cannot design by committee. You cannot design as though you are, let's say our publisher doesn't do anything design-wise with us. All they're doing is PR and marketing, right? And I would never sign on with a publisher that has a say in your design. You know what I mean? It's like, no, you don't have a say in our design, right? Now, if they're funding you, that's different. Then they're going to require you to report in on milestones, development milestones, so they're not just wasting their money, right? But that's not the case with us. So, we're not going to be hamstrung by any kind of whatever. It has to be inspired, right? So, first time chat from SleepyXZ. You can make a mecha game that's medieval high fantasy. That's true. Yeah, Robotrack kind of sort of thing, right? Lurkermeyer said the squad management fiddling in mecha, you sound so next level. And Mithrin says, I love the mecha angle. Of course, yeah. So Symphony of War engine actually, and Mithrin can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but actually not very much of a leap going from having 9 participants in the squad, right? And those are just individual units, to having one big thing. And actually, we've already done this in Symphony of War 1 with the final boss. One big thing that has several parts that just uses the grid that's already there, And so what we've done with the final boss in Symphony of War 1 is it has a body and 4 arms, right? But it looks like one big thing. And that's a very, I guess I would say a simple version. If we were to do a mecha version of that, it would have to be a lot more involved because that's just one fight in Symphony of War 1, right? Where we've done that thing. That's just one thing with several parts. So in the mecha version, of course, you would have anywhere between 9 and 12 slots that we could put components of a mecha, right? Even Mithrin says even the grid is an abstract that can be whatever. For a mecha, it wouldn't be a grid. Of course, yeah, it would. If it was a mecha, let's say that we designed it so that a squad in Symphony of War 1 becomes a mecha, and so therefore the only thing that could be in that unit, or in that squad, would be the mecha, right? You couldn't, for example, have the mecha surrounded by smaller support troops like infantry and tanks or whatever, right? If we wanted to do it where you could have a mecha and also smaller support style units in it, that could be also a thing, probably, but we could do it either way. I think it would actually be cool to have the option to have a mixed squad including mechas, but if it was only a mecha, then that mecha would have to be pretty chunky, pretty customizable, like extremely customizable, to the point where it's a lot more customizable than a squad currently is in Symphony of War 1. So, for example, you have, let's say it's only based on 9 slots that you currently have in Symphony of War 1. The middle slot would be the body, right? And so that could be the engine, or it could be the power core, right? Or you could have, 2 slots for that kind of torso, that vital core part. One could be the engine, and one could be the power supply, right? I do think probably if we were to have multiple parts, that you would probably have 2 minimum components that were just like, if you're going to make a mecha, maybe 3 minimum. Well, 4 really, unless we want to. If we have legs, right? if we want legs to be one thing with two legs or two separate legs, because inevitably we would want to have some mechas that don't have legs, that maybe they have a hover, like a hovering thing, or maybe they have a tank treads thing, or maybe they have a amphibious thing instead of legs, right? So, that legs, the mobilization part of the mecha could be an entire component, right? So maybe as a base component of a mecha, you have the power core, so that can be like the thing that if that blows up or that hits 0 hit points, then everything blows up, right? That can be like your beating heart. 2, the engine, so because without that you're not moving, because the power core is probably going to be providing resources to all of the components of the mecha, including the engine, right? And then 3, the how does it get around? Like I said, the amphibious, the hovering, the tank treads, or the legs. 2 legs versus 4 legs versus 6 legs, that sort of thing, right? So those probably would be the 3 minimum components, right? But then, and so those components would have hit points, armor, probably some sort of power capacity, right? If your power supply provides 100 units of power, then your engine is going to be taking up, 40, 30 of that. Then you're going to have weapons, and you're going to have armor systems, heat sink systems, computer systems, targeting systems, shield systems, stuff like that. And all of those systems can be different units within that squad. So let's say you already have, let's say it's just like a Battletech mecha. It's a humanoid shape. It's got 2 legs, 2 arms, and a body, right? And a head, kind of. But let's just say the head is still part of that power core, right? It includes the pilot, right? Because if the pilot dies, it doesn't matter what's happening with the mecha. The mecha will, I guess, maybe have a self-destruct sequence, right? Mithran says, that's something we'd have to discuss, but personally, I'd think your orders pre-combat phase would have more influence here. Of course. In front mission, for example, this is a way overpowered tactic, but you can just target the body every single time. And I think that's super overpowered. We wouldn't want to have it be that easy as it is in front mission, where you don't even have to worry about the arms, the legs, the shields, and stuff like that. But there would certainly be some way to target certain parts. Certainly if you wanted to target the body, maybe you could, but maybe there would be disadvantages to doing that. For example, if you were facing a heavy mecha that would take multiple rounds, maybe you would want to target the weapon systems instead of the body, right? But perhaps targeting the body is difficult because we designed the game so that you have to carve through a lot more armor to get to the power core, for example. But you don't have to carve through nearly as much to get to, for example, the legs or the rockets or the shields or the weapon systems or stuff like that. So you could make a choice to put it all into targeting the body and trying to get to that power core and just destroy the whole thing. But meanwhile, while you're trying to carve through to that power core, the entire rest of the mecha is punishing you, right? So you could do it that way. Certainly, we will think of a system that is balanced so that there is no one dominating strategy. That there will be a lot of choices, meaningful choices that you can make, both in design and in the execution in battles that will allow you to have fun and customize the shit out of your mechas. That said, there's so many different mecha systems. Let's kind of pull it back here to high-level stuff. There's a lot of different mecha games. There's Battletech. There's Front Mission. There's Gundam. That takes it completely different direction from the, I guess you could say, westernized. Battletech is Western. Front Mission is kind of a combination of the two. And Gundam is like completely Easternized, right? Where you have, I would say the Gundam style, they're a lot faster, right? They fly around and they just, they have a lot more capability. They're kind of like godlike machines. Whereas Battletech, they're slow. They're a little bit more utilitarian design. They look like military style machines. Whereas the Gundams, they look like kind of just more fancy, more aesthetic. And they have like helmets that have like samurai helmet designs on them that goes for that. I want to strike a balance between the two. I want to have kind of like you do have some really aesthetic mechas in Battletech, like the Timberwolf. I think looks really, really cool. It's got that cockpit and then the 2 little missiles packs on the shoulders, and then the PPC cannons on the arms. That's still, I would say, a military-style mecha that ends up looking really cool. The Atlas looks really cool. I mean, it's slow-moving, lumbering, big, giant thing, but it has like a skull helmet. So there's ways to make it both utilitarian and military style and also aesthetic. I certainly don't think we will go the direction of Gundam, because I don't think that serves... I love Gundam, but I don't think that serves Symphony of War really well to have a small amount of individual mechas that are godlike, that go around really fast and they can go up into space and they can just wipe out hundreds of mass-produced mechs. I don't think that serves our gameplay style very well. What serves our gameplay style is definitely more along the lines of Battletech, where you have a lot more mechas on your side and you have support troops, infantry, tanks, small tanks that would be about, 1/4 the height of a mecha. But then you also have other considerations, like in Front Mission. The mechas are called Wanzers, whatever, and they are much smaller. They are about, I would say, twice the height of a human, maybe 3 times the height of a human. And whereas the mechas in Battletech are enormous. They're huge. They're like 10, 15, 20 times the size of a human, or height of a human, right? Probably even bigger than that. And the mechas in Battletech weigh anywhere between 50 to 120 tons, whereas I think the Wanzers in Front Mission are way smaller than that. Maybe they weigh 20 tons at the top, right? Gundams, I don't even know. I think they're also really huge and heavy, but they're so powerful and they're so fast that it doesn't even matter. And that's kind of the nerdy part of me. I don't like that part because I like there to be some physical restrictions based on weight and size. And that part, I guarantee you, is going to be fucking amazing because we're going to have, it's going to appeal to the numbers nerds so much because kind of like where you have capacity in Symphony of War 1. Now, I keep saying we're gonna without even talking about it with Mithrin, but this is just like I'm musing here. We're gonna have a power core, but then we're gonna also have the capabilities of the machine. Excuse me. Hold on a second. So we're going to have the capabilities of the machine, but then we're also going to have the capabilities of the pilot. And I'm thinking what we do with this is machines don't level up, but maybe the computer does, right? Because it's got like a functional AI aboard, but then you have a pilot that does level up, right? And so one single mecha will have 2 entirely different paths of progression. I'm getting so excited about this, guys. I love this idea. The pilot will level up like an RPG character and will have a skill tree and all that blah, blah, blah traits and stuff like that, right? And since the pilot in this game is going to be the one thing in an entire squad, it's going to have a lot more progression and customization than a unit currently does in 74-1, where you're dealing with 9 things. Now, this is only one thing that encompasses the whole squad, right? So it would have a lot more like leadership capacity, not leadership, but it would be like skill capacity, So that's that, but then you also have the machine, right? So you have the RPG leveling up, getting experience, getting all skill trees and stuff like that. Then you have the machine. That's going to be entirely economical, because you're going to be investing your resources and technology into, and this is like your crunchy numbers game, right? Where you have a power core, of course, and you're going to find power cores, like you destroy some like whatever facility, and you find a power core that you can just like harvest. It's intact. You can just install it and to make a new mecha, right? And that power core is going to have a capacity, which can power an engine, the legs, the heat sinks, the shields, the barriers, the weapon systems, the computer systems, the AI, all that stuff. So that's going to be like your resource meta, right? You pour money, you pour gear into the machine part of it, right? So 2 different ways of evolving. Instead of just like the RPG, where you have you do have some economy in a JRPG, but like a lot of it's stuff that you find, like gear that you find in a dungeon, for example. JRPGs still have like just the JRPG style of progressing a character, where we would have just as involved as that, 2 entirely different paths for the same one thing. That sounds so awesome. That sounds so awesome. Like that's gonna be fucking amazing. I almost don't want to make Symphony War 2, right? But I already have the script written, and it's awesome. It's way better than Symphony War 1 script. And we have tons and tons and tons of new classes and stuff like that already made. So we're going to do it. And it's going to be awesome. But I think after that, we're definitely going to hop into this mecha thing. So any thoughts on that? Would I I feel like I talked more than I've ever talked in my life in that 1 hour. Oh, quick thing about the setting. So there's so many things we can do with it. I really like the idea that in this mecha universe, we can go with future Earth, right? Because I want to be able to talk about and theorize what happens to Earth, right? What happens to the humans? Because these humans are going to be the actual Earth humans. Is it going to be on Earth? I don't know. Is it going to be like Earth is no longer habitable and you're somewhere else? Maybe. I don't know. I'll have to think about that. So, but it is definitely going to be our timeline. No, I don't want it to be future Tanra. I I want it to be future Earth, real life, right? And because I want to draw from direct examples of what I predict would happen in the future of Earth in regards to, and some of this stuff is like never ever going to happen, like mechas, giant robots, because of, going by the physics we know of on Earth, for example, are not a practical thing. Even if we were to develop some kind of miniature fusion engine that could go into a machine, you still, considering the gravity and the materials available and the technology available on Earth, I don't think that 100-ton, 30 feet tall walking robots are ever going to be a thing in a practical military point of view, even in like 1,000 years, because it's just never, because of the square cube law. There'd have to be some sort of hyper advanced power source and lightweight material that you could, and robust material that you could construct it at. But even then, you still wouldn't want to put it all in one gigantic robot. Just like just like in World War II, you didn't want to put all of your resources into these huge 60, 70,000 ton battleships that could be sunk, and then you lost the equivalent of a year of your nation's GNP on one ship sinking, right? Like the U.S. Navy right now depends on supercarriers, but it is supported by a huge array. It only has like 11, I think, supercarriers right now, but it's supported by a huge array of frigates, destroyers, cruisers, submarines, satellites, aerial systems, AWACS, that you wouldn't want. You would never, ever, ever put these huge 110,000-ton supercarriers in the water without all of those support systems, because losing one supercarrier would be just a giant, giant disaster for the U.S. Navy, right? So in that sense, I do kind of think supercarriers are a white elephant. They're usable now because there's no rival. But in the future, if there was a rival, like say China, for example, became a legitimate naval rival to the United States, I don't think that. I probably don't think that'll happen in our lifetimes. But let's say that, for example, the U.S. Navy no longer has the kind of unchallenged dominance over the seas in Earth as it does now. I think you would probably want not to have all of those supercarriers on the water. You would want to have a larger amount of smaller vessels. So in the case of a conventional war, one of them sinks, you're not completely screwed, right? So what does that mean for this mecha thing? I don't think that that'll ever happen where you have these huge, huge exotic machines in a legitimate wartime situation, where you lose 120-ton mecha that was cost you $1 trillion to make, right? And one missile hit it in the wrong spot, and now you're gone, right? No, even if you had portable fusion engines or lightweight material, you would want to build a lot of smaller machines, right, to function in a mixed, a mixed economy of machines, like militaries typically do now. So, blah 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 blah. So a lot of this stuff is kind of make believe. There is various mecha settings do find ways of like justifying, like, okay, why do we have giant robots? Because they're cool, right? And they are cool, right? They're impractical, but they're super cool. So I'd have to find some way of justifying that. One of the ways I am thinking is that these machines... Okay, bear with me here. So these machines, if they were just giant war machines, similar to how tanks are right now, you would never want to build them because of the aforementioned overinvestment in individual units of military assets that you could lose, and then therefore lose way too much of your operational strength in a military situation. However, I can see a scenario where the one difference is the intelligence of the machine. And if the intelligence of the machine was rare enough that you could only put those intelligences in a smaller amount of military assets, you would then want those individual assets to be more powerful. You would want those assets to be more expensive, more powerful, more larger, right? If you were for whatever reason limited on the operational intelligence aspect of it, right now in the modern militaries, you have pilots and you have tank pilots and you have commanders who aren't really in short supply. You can find an abundance of them. But if for example, let's say that you had to have a specially gifted human mind that could handle the sort of dexterity of thought and agility of thought and all that stuff, and the kind of coordination between body and mind. You'd have to have a really special person. In that scenario, the person would be more valuable than the machine. If you lose the person, any number of powerful machines would not be effective for you, right? Or maybe it's not a person. Maybe it's some sort of cybernetic fusion of AI and human that combines the instincts and emotions and decision-making ability of the human, that you can still kind of keep that within a military structure where you're not fearing that an AI will just go haywire. Added on to that, this supercomputing high operational speed of a computer fused with a human, right? So that would be some kind of superhuman pilot. We would assume in a realistic scenario that person would be very, very well trained, very experienced. So they have a lot of skill, and their psychological profile is correct, and they have the intelligence, and they're young enough to do it. So it might be difficult to get the exact right person that's got the physical and mental ability and is like cybernetically enhanced or whatever, so that they can interface with this machine, right? Does that make sense? So that, I think, is a scenario when a giant robot becomes maybe a worthwhile investment. Right? So because if you only have, hey Milo, how's it going? If you only have 100 let's just call them super pilots, right? But you have your industrial base has the ability to produce 1,000 giant robots, right? What's more valuable to you? Obviously, it's the pilots. So, while let's say that there was no intelligence equation here, no AI, no pilot equation here. You said unlimited pilots. There is no way you would build 100 large robots. You would build 1,000 smaller robots in any scenario. In any scenario, you would do that, right? So take those same 1,000 robots, make lots of small bots that Voltron into bigger. Yeah. Milo says, "Yo, what the fuck, Kirby and the crystal shards in B tier? I'm sorry, Kirby, I failed you." Oh, is that better? Sorry, I'll move it up just for you, just for prima donna Milo. Should have been here earlier, man. Yeah. So in that scenario where you have 1,000 machines and 100 pilots, obviously, you're going to want to build those 100 machines that are bigger because the more valuable thing is the pilots, right? So that's when you start to get, I think, where it's a believable scenario where you have mechas. And that I think is a really compelling world building thing, because why do you have so few pilots? Let's say that there's a star-bound civilization. There's 7-8 billion whatever people on Earth now. Let's say there's 100 planets. You have 800 billion people, so you can't find a bunch of pilots. You know, now you're talking like the cream of the cream of the cream of the crop are the only people that you can trust with piloting a mecha, right? So what is so gosh darn special about these people? That's a very interesting potential for some story building, you know. It would have to be like the perfect chemical mix of genes and personality and intelligence and physical ability and technology and compatibility with the military and all that stuff. You know, if you had a setting like that in Symphony of War, you would have those pilots, of course, but then you would have pilots, maybe they aren't quite cut out for that. Maybe they're piloting regular tanks. Nothing wrong with that. You have to have, just like the U.S. military has, I would say, the naval equivalent of a mecha with these 110,000-ton supercarriers that are, like, each individually more powerful than any navy on Earth, right? You have to have support assets. You cannot just send a supercarrier off in any wartime situation. If there is a threat coming toward that supercarrier, you have to have every possible form of naval intelligence that can detect that threat way before it even becomes an actual threat to the carrier. You know, worst case scenario, you're going to sacrifice a destroyer, right? I mean, destroyers are pretty valuable too, but they're much less valuable than a carrier, right? You know, worst case scenario, you're going to sacrifice cheaper assets to maintain that white elephant that you've got as the beating heart of your navy, right? So, okay. By the way, U.S. Space Force, if you're hiring, I'm available. I just had some pretty cool ideas for you. Anyway, I'm not actually available. I'm making games. So, anyway, cool. That was a lot of talking. Any final questions or thoughts on all that shit? How was your New Year's, Milo? I don't know why I put Doom 64 there. I'll put it here. I don't really care. To me, N64 is a game with, or you ate all the grapes? Cool. To me, N64 is a system with not a lot of games, but the games that you know of, the iconic ones, are extremely iconic. I do think that Perfect Dark and Star Fox 64 are a little bit higher on my personal list than you would find on a list. You would probably see like Ocarina at the top. And actually, I do think I'm going to move these down a bit. I like Rogue Squadron a lot, and I like GoldenEye a lot. So this is definitely my Ogre Battle 64 is not on here. Stupid list. Whatever. It would be S tier. I haven't played as much. I barely played it, really. But you know, it would be S tier. Perfect Dark. Quest 64. Quest 64 sucks. I know that's like it's like, and I love Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. That's another one of these games that gets shit on all the time in tier lists. But no, I think Mystic Quest is awesome. Quest 64 sucks. It's not. It's one of these games where like, oh no, it's underrated. No, it's not underrated. It's exactly rated where it needs to be. It's got good music, but that's about it. I like the music. Some of the levels are kind of cool looking, but they're not very well designed, and the combat is atrociously boring. And it's also like way unbalanced. All you have to do is level up your one heal spell and your boulder falling earth spell, and you just use that in every single fight. So true, yeah, it's super fly. Could have been good. It could have been good. That's true. With that, I don't think fundamentally that the systems that they had make it purposely suck. It's just their execution was not good. Story, meh, whatever. Perfect Dark. Of course, Milo. The villainess is a hottie. That's my guy. Rofist. Perfect Dark is so good. It's so perfect. The game is named Perfect, and it is a perfect game. If for some reason it performs better than GoldenEye, it doesn't lag as much, but it's got a really, really cool near future Earth setting. The weapons are fucking awesome. I love the weapons in Perfect Dark. The level design is really, really good. I think the level design is better than in GoldenEye. The alien stuff at the end, I don't really care about that stuff. I like the like the skyscraper and the secret base and the submerged base and all that stuff is just awesome. The music is so good in Perfect Dark. I don't even like Perfect Dark is like, it's interesting. Joanna Dark as a character, like you think about like, first action female spy, like, what are you talking about? Joanna Dark was the first. Like, she doesn't get nearly as much attention as an awesome character that happens to be female, right? I don't think anyone even thought about that when playing that game, right? It's just an awesome game and a really cool character that happens to be the protagonist in that game, right? So, like, oh yeah, Samus was the first. Okay, maybe, but like Joanna Dark, come on. Overlooked, underrated character. So, and Star Fox 64, I think there was an NBA Jam 64, but the only one I really care about is the Super Nintendo version. So, but Star Fox 64 is so good. I think it's one of the greatest space sims of all time, honestly. And the fact that it was on the 64 and it didn't run like complete shit. So, yeah, good game. Very good game. All right. Was it for the Wii? I don't know. Best rail shooter. Yes. Best on rails space sim. So, do we really need to talk about GoldenEye? Yeah, not really. Rogue Squadron is awesome. Not on rails, but also awesome. I love the space battles in Rogue Squadron. Whichever the one where the last level is the Battle of Endor. I can't remember if that's 1, 2, or 3, but good game. All right. Okay, cool. I'm gonna wrap that up. The VOD will be up. I'm gonna snip the VOD so that it's like right when I started talking about, I think, the Mecha game, because the Dark Age of Gaming stuff, I think I just rambled about some stupid shit for way too long. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Our next, I think we're probably not going to do another update until the localization, or not another podcast anyway, until the localization build is out. Because again, we're just waiting on that translation to be done. Then we're going to be QAing it, and then we'll finally be able to. What the hell? Did you guys hear that big boom? Milo, I kind of included some stuff in that video that I shouldn't have. Oh shit. I think I lost that one, Milo. I'm sorry. Let's do it again. It was a good time. Maybe we'll do like a panel. But yeah, I didn't want to publish that one. Sorry, Milo. But we'll we'll do it again. We'll do it again. I have to think of a better format for having guests on, because we did like an interview, and I don't know how successful that was. I think it would be more interesting to have like guest, just kind of we're able to kind of riff about whatever the subject matter is, and the subject matter doesn't have to necessarily be the person. It can be like, the DLC launch. I think that is a more interesting format setting. So anyway, cool. I'm starving. My throat hurts from all this talking, and I'm going to go do some shit. Thanks for hanging out with me, and we will see you maybe in a couple weeks again for another Symphony of War live dev stream. See ya. Take care.